US economy surprised many people at the beginning of this year. Growth was hardly 2.2% year-on-year and 0.1% quarter-on-quarter. We expected a much higher growth. The culprit finally was the extreme winter which we had seen in the US. It was the third coldest winter on record. You can imagine if you were in the US, house building came to a standstill. People certainly didn't want anymore to go out in these polaric temperatures for dinner, and that was reflected at the end in the economic growth of the first quarter. In the US, things are changing big time, I would say. I should highlight that first, the US will have probably a very strong year of economic growth. The IMF predicts 2.8%. We at Bill, we predict an economic growth this year of 3.2%, probably even stronger. What is very important here is how come that this economic growth of 3.2%, that long-term rates in the US are still at 2.8%. What we believe is happening in the US is that we are at the beginning of a new cycle. We have had a very long economic cycle between 1984 and 2011. 1984, we had interest rates of 14%. 2011, we had interest rates of 1.7%. And clearly, that cycle has come to an end. This is a similar cycle which has started just now, as we have seen after the Second World War. After 1946, we started with 2.2%, and this cycle culminated in 1984. For those who knew Ronald Reagan, it was the famous Reagan era, where we had actually interest rates of 14%. Investors have a lot of problems to accept that this one-way road between 1984 and 2011 is finished. They made a lot of money. It was quite easy to make money. I think the average return on fixed income over the last 25 years was roughly 5%. The average return on equity was only 2%, despite that equities have a higher risk. So if I speak now to our clients and I say, be cautious, because interest rate cycle is changing, a lot of people still have issues with this. In the short term, what we have seen is that economic growth is strengthening. What we have seen as well is that personal income is growing 3.3%. What we have seen is that car sales have been splendid in the US over the last 12 months. So all shows that we are going in the right direction. What we have not yet seen, and what was a very hot topic 4 years ago, was inflation or inflation expectation. Currently, inflation is at 1.6% in the US. And I should say that inflation in itself, it's really a feeling, it's empirical. So investors and consumers in the US will change sometime over the next 9 to 12 months and expect higher inflation from the US economy. We were very surprised that if the economy is growing at 3.2%, that rates are around 2.6, 2.7. Doesn't really make sense, except if you accept that the debt to GDP of the US is 100% nowadays. The US administration will not pay you more than 100 basis points probably. So your return is the 100 basis points plus inflation expectation. Now, when does this inflation expectation come true? Probably not over the next few months. However, I would say over the next 9 to 12 months, there's everything given that those rates actually will increase. The advice we give to our investors is very clear. We want them to be very light in US Treasuries with long-dated maturities. Investors should be very cautious on these instruments.